And music also plays a huge role for me. I listen to the same song on repeat every time I write a book, but like I listen to the same song each time. Like for the last thing he told me, it was If I Should Fall Behind. It was a Bruce Springsteen song, a live version of that song. The case here was that I had a good friend who was living out in the Hamptons, and she told me this wild story when I was out there, that during the hurricane in the late 1930s, the Montauk was separated from the rest of Long Island. They literally got separated. It was like an island unto itself. And I became fascinated with a house that would have been on that island by itself and the people over generations who would have lived there and what would be happening that could take that house down. And when I went to do research, I spent a lot of time at the Montauk Library. I came across a house called Tick Hall. I believe it was Tick Hall that Dick Cavett owned. And that became the basis for Hunt Hall, for how I understood Huntington Hall, Hunt Hall. There was a great documentary that he made, he and his wife, about that house. So that's sort of the where that house came from. And you're absolutely correct. These houses in the Poconos and New York State, all these old houses, in some ways, they really hold the people's stories who live in them. And I wanted to spend that book living in one of those homes. I spent a lot of time writing short stories in graduate school and in college before I tried to write a novel. And I still love writing short stories. And in some ways, I think short stories are just as hard as novels, if not harder, because you have to do everything you do in a book, like how you were just talking about that great song that you like. You have to do all the storytelling in shorter form. And there were some short story writers, Ann Beattie, Melissa Bank, Deborah Eisenberg, all of whom I was lucky enough to take classes from. And they're so amazing at dialogue. And I spent a lot of time studying how different people were able to write dialogue, what they did, how it sounded. So that I think is the backbone for me of storytelling, that the way people are talking to each other feels specific and illuminating and surprising. I love thinking about dialogue and working on dialogue in that way. And so by the time it came to writing my novels, I think I had a very specific way that I approached dialogue. I sort of found the way I wanted to approach it. And that sort of has stayed the same in all my books. I can try to articulate it. I think for me, I always think of each scene in terms of the dialogue is operating on two levels. One is how it is propelling the story forward. But on the other level, what is the emotional transaction that is happening over that scene that makes that scene not only relevant to the story and necessary to the story, but illuminating to the story. And I end the scene when I find that. So the scene often becomes, or the dialogue and the scene become like a cliffhanger to get you to the next. I feel so blessed and lucky that anyone is picking up one of my books, and I want them to not want to put it down. So how is the dialogue? How are we moving the story forward that you feel like you are peeking in on a conversation you want to keep listening to? And I'm always sort of trying to move the dialogue in that way. Is this a conversation that someone is really, really going to want to be a part of and hear what happens next? And in the sequel, you get almost all those answers about what he was doing and why. And the last thing he told me, and it's part of my journey writing it, was realizing that wasn't his moment to tell that. So I really leaned into Hannah's story there. Um, and he remains a little bit of a mystery, which some readers liked and some readers were mad at. But one of my favorite moments ever since publishing any book was that I got on a plane. We were shooting the TV show for The Last Thing He Told Me. And so I had a crew hat that said The Last Thing He Told Me. And I got on a plane and there was a woman there holding this beautiful baby. And she's like, do you know anything about that book? And I'm like, oh, I actually wrote that book. But I don't normally wear a hat with the name of my book on it, but um, it's because we're shooting a show. And she said, because this baby is Owen, named after Owen in your book. And it was like the greatest thing that's ever happened. I was so excited. I think I scared the crap out of her. I'm like, oh my God, I was so excited. But so Owen certainly, to your point, did have a resonance in the storytelling, but it wasn't his story. You know, we didn't know it was going to be a limited series. And what was the response to this book has been so extraordinary that when I was talking with readers and they would say, well, what happens next? Do you know? And I realized I had an answer. So everyone was very patient with me. And I sort of quietly went off and wrote the first 100 pages. And when I figured out that it was going to be a second book, then I sat down with our wonderful showrunner and walked him through what I thought the book was going to be. And he sort of went off while I was writing the book. And they created the second season of the show in tandem. So the sort of central question of the second book is, what does it mean to be forgiven? And both the show and the book answer that question, but in different ways, especially in the second season, that we go much deeper in the show with certain side characters that you'll see. And has been very fun. I think the idea too that, you know, law enforcement, that there's so many people that you can't count on in these books, lend itself to something that I try to do in each of my books, which is Gloria Steinem said a long time ago how important it is to watch a woman become the hero of her own life. And so I really like trying to create characters like Hannah Hall who become the hero of their own life because they learn they need to count on themselves more than anyone else to help them. And that's certainly the case with both the book and the sequel here.